Welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. This is Carly Stevens Books for all things writing, publishing, and indie author life. And I am super excited to have Nikki Haverstock here with me today. So Nikki has been a full-time writer for over 7 years who lives on a small ranch high in the Rocky Mountains. She has studied comedy at Second City and Groundlings, which are big names. If you're not into comedy, that's a pretty big deal. And has published over 20 cozy space and paranormal mysteries that are heavy on the humor. In 20 years as a competitive archery coach, she worked hard to bring the individuals and teams to success, not only in the competition field, but also in their personal life, using her master's degree in kinesiology, sports psych/performance enhancement. This emphasis on helping individuals to be the best version of themselves was a perfect match for CliftonStrengths coaching. Nothing brings her more joy than to help a writer to connect with their strengths in a way that brings meaningful change to their lives and work. So thank you so much for being here with me today, Nikki.
Yeah, I'm super excited.
Yeah, it's your background is so fascinating to me. So could you start just by explaining how you got into writing and writing coaching? Um,
Yeah. So, like many people who are writers, I was an avid reader from a very early age, and I was an archery coach at a university for years and years, and then we moved to some place much more rural. And I did a couple other fun things. I did some art stuff, but I was trying to really find out what was going to be my next great passion because archery coaching had been a huge part of my life. And that was around 2013, 2014 when I was kind of like, okay, what is going to be this next stage of my life? And a friend was doing quite well at publishing, and I knew her through our, art society that we were a part of. And just kind of was like, well, what does it take? And she started describing what self-publishing was like. And then she kind of, uh, you know, explained that like, yeah, you can learn how to write. Because I wasn't a very strong writer in school for, like papers and stuff. And she's like, well, you can learn. And I was like, oh,
mhm.
okay. If it's just hard work and taking classes, I can do that. So I started writing and I wrote for about 4 or 5 years when I took a class with the Better Faster Academy, which is where I work, and really, really loved the information. I really connected with it because of my sports psych background. It just made so much sense. This is kind of like sports psych for writers, where you start saying, here are tools, here are tricks, let's get into alignment, let's approach this, let's put together a system that works for you. And I just really loved it and took almost all the classes for several years
Mm.
and then just had this desire to get deeper into the work. And so I spoke to Becca Syme, who is now my boss, and was like, I'm really interested in getting, the certification and stuff, and started working with her. And I've been doing that now for 2 years. And I interned, I think, for about 6 months before that. And still doing both of them kind of on top of each other full time. But I really, really enjoy that work.
It's interesting that there is so much overlap just in the mentality of what you were doing versus what you are doing. It's not those aren't fields, archery coaching and writing coaching that you'd think would have that much overlap. But yeah,
No,
that's
I mean, both of them are hugely mental. Anyone who's done
yeah.
any archery is not the most athletic of sports in the sense that you aren't doing a lot of running. You're not doing a lot of strategy. It makes it sound bad, but it's very, very mental. You can
Mhm.
talk yourself out of hitting the target in a heartbeat. And the same is true for
Mhm.
writers. You can sit down to write and kind of talk yourself out of it or convince yourself, I can't do it today. And a ton of the strategies and tips and tricks and stuff come from one to the other are really useful.
Mm. Yeah, so I wanted to talk to you about some of that, the mentality and making the most of your strengths, your mental and strengths and abilities, while not obsessing over those things that um maybe aren't your strengths. So since you are a writing coach, what are some of the bad pieces of advice or the misconceptions or some of those things that can mess writers up mentally that are just not true?
Well, the biggest one that immediately jumps to mind is that you have to do all the things right this second. And I teach a class on burnout, and unfortunately, it's a very popular class.
Mhm.
And one of the big things that we get people in burnout is they say, I thought I had to do it all right now. I had to be on every social media platform. I had to do, I had to be doing TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Patreon. I had to have um, I had to be wide. I had to write 6 books a year. I have to, the list is endless. And I know people doing all of those things. And I could probably sit here for another minute or two and brainstorm other things they're doing. Every conference, every, newsletter swap, all of that.
Mhm.
But I don't know anyone, even 7-figure authors, who are doing all those things. A lot of them are, they try stuff, it doesn't work for their genre or their brand or their voice, or they hate it. So it's like a bad fit. So that's a big, big misconception, is you have to do all the things. And beyond that, a lot of it comes down to, is it the right advice for you? So someone can give you the best advice that is life changing for them, and it might not be a good fit for you. So, I know people who write multiple books at the same time, and people who can only write one book at the same time. And if you are in one camp and you tell yourself you have to be in the other camp, that can cause a lot of distress. And so a lot of the advice is really about getting rid of the advice that doesn't fit for you. And that's a little bit harder. I wish I could tell you, like, this is the bad advice and this is the good advice, and everyone should take all this good advice and everyone should take all the, get rid of this bad advice. But the truth is, it's really personalized. And so, sometimes we can say, like, most writers need some quiet time in their day to just think. That's true for a lot of writers, but it's still not true for every writer.
Mhm.
So, that's one of the huge misconceptions, is that somewhere they've taken a class, read a book, spoke to someone who said, you have to do it this way. All writers have to plot. All writers have to pants. All writers have to write in a series, or one project, or in the morning or at night, or any of those things. And a lot of times they come in, brand new clients will come in and they're really struggling with this exact advice that someone has told them they have to do.
Yeah, it's definitely been a learning curve for me since I learned about the CliftonStrengths and trying to wrap my head around just how personal a writing journey can be, because I'm the kind of person who, like, give me the rules. How
Yeah.
does it work? And then I want to just figure out how to do those really well and then get from point A to point B, because that's how this works, right? But so how, especially for people like me who just don't always know how to sift through different pieces of advice and want to take, you know, if somebody's successful, why not listen to what they say? Um, so how can people identify what their strengths are and begin to sift through all of that?
Yeah. I mean, the short and kind of expensive answer is that we recommend the Gallup Clifton Strengths test. And the reason that we recommend it is because so many people like it. It's not like
Mm,
we like it and everybody else hates it. It almost uniformly, people take the test and go, wow, that's crazy. It sounds so much like me. And you
mm,
can just go to Gallup, just like the polls, GALLUP. You can go there, you can go to their store, you can buy a top 5 code and just take the test. I think it's like $20 or something. And that usually gives you a lot of information. But since I don't expect everyone to do that, there's other ways to kind of figure it out. And a lot of the things that we start out by asking people who are already writing is, what already works for you. And people usually know. And a lot of times they're really unhappy with what they know. Like they say, I have to think about it for a few months and then I write it all at once. And then they go, but I don't want to do that. I want to write faster, or I want to
mm.
write differently. Um, and so a lot of times we just flat out say, like, do you have to talk about your book? Do you have to think about your book? Do you tend to, like, are you a steady writer all the way through? Are you someone who kind of goes and then has this big deadline and then drops down, and we call it like a phoenix type, where they like push, 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 and then they kind of like have a little mini burnout and then they start the process over. So a lot of times we start in our write better hyphen faster class does a lot of that, where it's like, How do you do this? How do you do that? What's worked in the past? And if you are not a writer, or even if you are a writer, we also recommend looking back on things like previous jobs,
Mm,
schooling, what worked really well for you when you were in school. And because a lot of times I'll talk to people and I'll be like, have you tried this? And they're like, yeah, I used to do that at my old job, but I haven't tried that with writing because I figured that it worked really differently. And it's like a lot of this stuff, like I like to get up early and do it immediately before I start my
mm,
day when I'm at my best. If that's how you used to work at your job, or if you were a stay-at-home parent, when you were at home parenting, I would get up early and do it before the kids are awake. I would try that with your writing. And I would
mm,
look for things like that that were really successful. Like if you used to study by getting together with friends, and doing it all together, then maybe you need to join a sprint group. Maybe you need to find a local writers group. If you're motivated working with other people, maybe try a co-writer, things like that. So even I can recommend a test, big fan of the test. But if you have no interest in the test, and that's fine, then you can do a lot of that just by asking yourself what has worked, and then be really honest with yourself. Because a lot of times people will say things
mm,
like, this works for me, but I don't want it to work for me because somebody said if I was a real plotting, this comes up a lot. I just
mm.
sit down and write my book, but I don't think that's right. People said I should be plotting my book. So now I'm going to try plotting my book and I can't finish this book. And it's like, well, maybe because it's not how you work best.
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of it is experimentation as well. It's not necessarily trying everything, but starting to identify what has worked for you and
Hmm.
maybe branching out in that direction and seeing if it continues to work for you. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Yeah. And but books are a little bit like children, and anyone who has, I only have the one, but people who have multiple children will tell you that they had a system, and the system that worked well with the first child might not totally work with the second. So sometimes I will talk to people and they'll be like, I'm trying to do exactly what I did in the first book and it's not working for the second. So there is some variation. And I will tell you that I know people who have different pen names or write in different genres, and they have to approach some of those a little bit differently because they might have a trope heavy romance. They might write really differently than they do their epic fantasy. Their epic fantasy requires more time, more attention. They spend a lot more time thinking, where's the, and this could be exactly flipped. This is not, I'm not
No,
making
no,
statement
that's
rules.
literally the situation I find myself
Okay.
in.
You're like, this sounds familiar.
Sounds very familiar. Yes. Trying to figure out what my writing process is has just been, you know, I just do whatever works and it's never the same thing twice because the same system
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily work for the same book or even month to month, it can shift around. So I'm just fascinated with how people can identify what are some of those patterns when it appears to be a bit more chaotic. Like I took the top 5
Okay.
Gallup uh poll, or not, the CliftonStrengths top 5
Yes.
test. And I'm a learner first,
Okay.
responsibility.
Okay.
I know a few of my things, but um, I would love to hear an example from you, like when you figured out what maybe your top 3 named strengths were. How did you implement those changes to your writing life, and how did they help improve what you were doing?
Yeah. So I also have high learner. I also have focus, which is a strength that likes to narrow in and like just do the thing. And
Mhm,
so that helped me realize that the more interruptions I have were more of a challenge for me. So I started
mhm,
moving things to kind of like parts of the day. So I would do admin in the morning and I do writing in the afternoon in general. There's always exceptions.
mhm,
I tend to struggle with putting down a project and picking it back up. So I try to make sure that I don't get big interruptions. Like I'm not great with like taking a week off a project. It almost feels like restarting because I
mm,
like to have that sort of locked in. It helps me to say no to more things because I know that the more things I have on my plate, the bigger the distraction is.
mm,
Um, Things like today. So I had a vet appointment excuse me, in the morning for my horses. I had a client. I have meetings in the afternoon. So I was like, well, let's record today because I know I'm going to be so interrupted. I probably
Mm.
will not be able to get into my writing. So I kind of will like put all of my chaotic events that mess with me sort of like there. And then I have a strength called activator that likes to start things. So I realized is that when I feel motivated to do something, I need to jump on it immediately because the feeling will not last and I need
Hmm.
to do it quickly. So I do a lot of like if I think I'm ready to start the next chapter, I try to get to my computer immediately and start writing it like as soon as possible before I like talk myself out of it. Like, are
Hmm.
you sure? Or I kind of just lose that. And then I have a strength that many, many writers have, something like because we've had thousands of writers, like something like 7,000 writers come through the Better Faster Academy. We have access to what are the most common strengths for writers in their top five. And so something like 65% of writers have intellection in their top five. And yeah, there
Hmm.
you go.
Yeah, I
And
think it was
those,
5.
yeah,
Mm.
same with me. And then if we look at people who unlock their full 34, as we call it, I would say there's probably closer to 85, 90% of people who have it in their top 10, which is
Mm.
kind of what we look at. So, so I can say most writers, not all. There are many great writers who don't have this, but most writers have intellection. And so making sure that I create time in my day where it's quiet. No podcasts, no audio books,
Mm.
no TV running. I like to do walks, but you can also, a lot of people shower, do dishes, chores, gardening, some really easy computer games. So if it's too intense, you know that your mind is fully engaged. But if it's like Tetris, you're probably fine. To make sure that I have time to think about what I want to be writing because I need a
Mm.
little bit of time for that. And then also just to process my day because intellection likes to take in information and then it likes to think through it deeply. And
Mm.
so if it doesn't have time to think through it, it's almost like you can't digest that food and you start to feel scattered and you start to feel, all of that. And so those were all things that helped me start to understand my process a little better. And then it helped me to start saying no to certain advice because I got better understanding what my intuition was because I started to feel a difference between like, you should try this and me feeling this internal, like, oh, that sounds awful. And like, okay, I like that idea. And then it helped me sort through information a little bit faster. But I do try to stay open because it's easy to start locking yourself away and saying, I can't possibly ever do that. Like, because of my high focus, I never thought I could write two books at once. But I
Mm.
recently started writing two books at once because they were so different and how I was writing them. I'm fully pantsing one book and I'm kind of plotting the other. We'll see how that works long term, but I'm glad I gave into the urge to try it when the internal desire, when inside of me said, I want to try writing this book. I said, okay, if I want to try writing the book, let's try writing the book. If someone else told me I had to, I probably shouldn't listen to that.
Mm. So beyond being able to make some of those adjustments for yourself and your schedule and understanding yourself just as a person a bit more, what is the value, would you say, to understanding your strengths if you want to be a successful writer? How does it help actually propel a career if that's what somebody wants?
It's a great question. Um, so I will say you can definitely be a great writer without knowing these things. We meet people all the time who are really successful. The organization has been going on for I think about 6 years. I took the first class in 2018, and I think that's about when she started teaching it. But we get people all the time who've been great authors, super crazy successful, who only recently have taken the class because they're like, oh, my editor told me I had to, or things like that. So you can definitely do it without knowing, certainly without knowing your Gallup strengths or your Enneagram or your Myers-Briggs, which we also use. And a lot of people do like. You can definitely do those things. a lot of those people just are people who are like, I just decided to write and I just did it this way and I never questioned it. And they've just trucked along great and they enjoy learning more, but they're like, they don't really need it because they're not really having problems. But a lot of people have an internal sense of like, I could be doing this better. I can just sense it. I could sense that there is something that would, something is holding me back. And I don't even know where to look at it. And so as coaches, we can usually hear it because we start hearing the shoulds. I feel like I should be doing this. And then we ask, well, why do you think that? Well, my co-writer says this, or my, unfortunately, my parents said this, or my spouse says this. Um, and so we can usually hear a lot of that stuff even without the test. Um, in some ways it's like therapy, but we are not therapists. I always encourage people, but a lot of times people do need therapy for their writing because they're carrying around traumas from childhood or core beliefs that aren't accurate and things like that. Uh, a lot of times the strengths overlap with particular strengths that people have within writing, like literally like character development, foreshadowing, dialogue. Some of those things literally do, we start to see like certain strengths tend to be more like this. And so that's really helpful because it's kind of like, well, maybe that's something you should lean into because you're good at it already. I do see a lot of people in burnout, and knowing how you function can be really helpful for burnout because burnout can often come from being out of alignment with how you work. And then also burnout recovery. It can really help if you already know what you enjoy and you're energized by. It's a lot easier to do recovery. So you and I are
Mm.
learners. So us signing up for a class, like an art class, might be like just the thing to get us. Like sure, writing classes, but we're already doing those. So we already know we're doing those. But like a going and taking, like I'll go take an improv class or I'll take an art class or something can just completely lift my whole mood in
Mm.
a way that things it like exponentially lift my mood as compared to like something that if my husband says this is what he loves doing and he takes me to go do his thing, he's a wonderful guy, but it might not always be the trick as opposed to what works for me, if that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, well, I have found this whole concept to be fascinating. I know it's really taken hold in the writing community in the last
Mhm.
3 years or so. All of a sudden, I was seeing it everywhere, and it was nice to just, at its heart, get the permission not to do everything and not to be everything and not to always fit a certain mold, like the rapid release that so many people do, or all these kind of artificial constraints that we put on ourselves. And so I know I'm a work in progress, and I was really looking forward to hearing more about the what you think about all of these things. So how can people find your services, your work, all of that online for those who want to go a little deeper?
Yeah, so I work for the Better Faster Academy.com, so you can go to our website. I really recommend the Write Better Faster class. Now, I gotta say, a lot of people will say, I'm taking the writing better, I'm taking the writing faster class. And it's like, no, no, no. It is not a class to teach you how to write faster. It might. I have started to write faster as I have started to get rid of unhealthy expectations of what my work should be. I have
Mm,
written faster, but it is not a class to teach you to write faster. It is better hyphen faster. And so it's about becoming the best version of yourself and getting to that better version faster rather than spending 20 years. So the Better Faster class is always, I'm a huge fan of it. It's still my favorite class.
mm,
You get an hour of coaching included with that price, and you can always request me. You can, if you want to see me, my colleagues who coach are all amazing, and so I can highly recommend all of them. If you want to skip over that and go straight to coaching, you can just email manager@betterfaster.com, and that's on the information. And you can say, I want a coaching session with Nikki, and she'll get it all taken care of. She'll get you invoice. She'll get you the test if you don't have it already. Um, and you can do all that. And then I'm everywhere on the internet for we were before we started recording, I said, I do a YouTube channel with my husband for reality TV because that's something that feeds me. I write books, obviously. I'm on all the vendors. I'm on TikTok. I am everywhere. So it is somewhat easy to find me if you look for me. But yeah, that's the best way if you're interested specifically in the coaching. And if you are not sure, that we have a QuitCast YouTube channel that my boss Becca runs. And if you like what I have to say, you'll love Becca. So there's a YouTube channel, there's now a podcast. They do monthly free coachings on the Better Faster Academy YouTube. And I'm sorry, the Better Faster Academy Facebook page. That there's a newsletter. So there's a Facebook group. I moderate it. So you can join the Better Faster Writers, I think it is. And you can join that and you can say, I don't know Becca, but I saw Nikki on YouTube and I'd like to learn more and we can get you into that group. So there's a lot of free options. When anyone to feel like we're saying you have to pay this huge lump sum to learn more. There's lots and lots of free options. And you could probably listen to that for a few months before you even felt like you had to take a class. You could decide. So there's lots and lots of free options as well.
All right, well, awesome. Thanks again for agreeing to talk to me. I had a great time talking to you, and I hope
Yeah.
all of you out there got as much out of it. So make sure to subscribe to this channel for more good writing, publishing, indie author life stuff, and definitely go find Nikki. I'll put a bunch of links down below if you want to get that coaching, find the books, connect with the Better Faster Academy. So till next time.